you start working with a producer, you're getting someone who wears a lot of different hats, and they're bringing a lot of different experience to the table. But beyond that, one of the best things about a producer is that you are getting somebody who's outside of your process. They're outside of your community, most likely. And so they're coming into the songs with like no nostalgia.
You're listening to the Ferment Podcast, conversations about worship and transformation. Today's guest is Josh Ray. Josh is a producer, worship leader, and the owner of Anchour Studio in Windham, Maine. This episode is brought to you by Monk Drums. Monk Drums is a creative desert venture that strives to combine beauty and business as one heartbeat. Monk Drums' main focus is handcrafted wooden drums that allow us to love, assist, and serve all who accompany us on this path. Use the coupon code FERMENTPOD to get 5% off your Monk Drums order. Find them on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Monk Drums, and every Monday look for hashtag Monk Drum Monday. Speaking from personal experience, Monk Drums are wonderfully crafted and they sound amazing. They blend the best traits of both the djembe and the cajon, and I found them to be incredibly versatile in both the live and studio environment. Check them out at monkdrums.com.
This episode is brought to you by our friends at worshipteam.com. Worshipteam.com comes preloaded with over 12,000 songs, with new songs being added all the time. Hillsong, Bethel, Vineyard, Six Steps, Jesus Culture, just to name a few. Service building with Worship Team is a snap, and all the songs are completely legal and licensed. You can also find them on social media, Facebook at worshipteam.com, Twitter at worshipteam, Instagram at worshipteam_WT. Visit them at worshipteam.com for a free trial today. Complete worship planning with thousands of songs, easy interface, mobile apps, and legal rights for your church. All you need in one place, worshipteam.com.
Hey podcast listeners, this is Darren Verrier, Director of Publishing for Vineyard Worship. Our latest single is More Than Anything, written by Adam Russell and sung by Samuel Lane, author of Saved and Adore Him.
Your glory fills our hearts with hallelujah. Your glory fills our hearts with hallelujah. Your glory fills our hearts with hallelujah. Your glory fills our heart with hallelujah.
Find More Than Anything and all of our singles wherever you listen to music.
All right, everybody. Hey, I am here with a good friend from the North Woods of Minot, Maine. Is that right?
That's right.
All right. Yeah, this is my friend Josh Ray, and we've been buds for a while. But the reason I wanted him to come on the podcast is because, well, he's a lot of things. He's a worship leader. He's a dad. He's a husband. But one of the coolest things that Josh has going, in addition to all of that, is that he owns Anchour Studio, and he's a producer, player. I don't even know what are you, Josh?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm all those things, you know?
Yeah.
Depends on the day.
Yeah, that's it. But I wanted Josh to come on because I wanted to talk about like making music. And that's not really the center theme of this podcast necessarily, but a lot of worship leaders and a lot of songwriters and creatives listen to this. And I just want to talk about like the nuts and bolts of making music for a few minutes, if that'd be okay.
So good.
Yeah.
It's great. Let's do it.
Before we do that though, why don't we give people a little bit of history? Like, who are you and what are you doing? Like,
Sure.
Yeah. Can you do that?
Yeah, I grew up in the Vineyard. My parents collided with Vineyard when I was about 9 years old. And it was just amazing, just seeing my mom and dad fall in love with Jesus. And it was right in a pretty like wild time in the Vineyard history, a lot of dramatic healings were pretty commonplace.
And by wild time, you mean mid-90s renewal.
Mid-90s renewal.
That's
that was
it.
Mullets and flags and shofar horns, all of it. It's just, it was really cool though, as a child to see my parents encounter Jesus and just be all in. And then my parents eventually, planted a Vineyard Church, became pastors. And it's safe to say that I've been immersed in Vineyard culture for a long, long time.
Yeah.
So part of my history, my journey into, worship, was that I was always invited to come and participate, even as a teenager. And so I started playing, and then I got involved with local bands, and I played with a lot of bands, and did that whole thing through high school and college. Then moved back home, and my church was right there, and it was awesome, and just was so excited to kind of plug back in.
Yeah. And when you plugged back in, you were like leading worship.
Well, yeah. I mean, I was. It's a long story that we don't have time for, but I kind of was in a season where I needed a home church again, and it was really cool to come back to my roots and have this incredible church that loved to worship and had space for me. And it was funny, like I was asked to play on one of the worship bands, and then I was asked like a couple weeks later, hey, can you lead a song? I led a song. The next week after that, the worship leader quit. They moved away. So then I inherited like this worship team. That was my introduction to
here you go,
leader.
Straight into the frying pan.
Exactly.
Come back to church, and now you own it.
And my story, as far as like getting into production and
why did you start a
recording,
studio?
Well, being in bands, I was in recording studios a couple times, and I just was really fascinated by it. I kind of have this nerdy side that loves technology and love kind of piecing things together, and it's a cool environment to me. I remember just getting into this recording studio in Maine, this place called Big Sound that's no longer around. Has this big old British console. It's the centerpiece of the studio. 10,000 knobs. Didn't know what any of them did. Everything back in those days was recorded to a tape machine. And I just remember recording my band, and there was just something so cool about, capturing a moment and then going back into a control room and listening to it you just played. And for some reason, it just lit a fire in me. And I was lucky enough that I went to a really cool high school that was really into the arts. And I had a teacher, and I remember he was so excited because he knew I was into recording. And he was so excited because he just got a new computer. It was like cutting edge. Mm-hmm. And he pulled me aside and said, Josh, just got this computer. It's like state of the art. You can record 2 tracks of audio at the same time. What? And it's just like mind blowing. I remember my brain being like, what? This world we live in, it's crazy, And so he created a special course actually just for me because he knew I was into recording. He sent me home with a little like Tascam cassette tape recorder.
Yeah, like
and
a little
PZM,
four track.
Yeah, it's a little 4-track thing, and I'd ping pong tracks and stuff, and these little PZM mics. And I used to do this thing where, I'd play stuff back through the speakers even, and just turn it up super loud and point the mics at it so I could get more tracks out of it. It just all these kind of crazy little things. And you could only do that so many times before the tape started to get so like warbly that everything's out of tune. But I remember that whole summer, I just recorded like crazy. I recorded my first band when I was 17 years old.
Okay.
In a concrete basement.
What could go wrong?
What could go wrong? Just using like SM57 mics and all this stuff. Anyway, then went to school for recording.
Where did you go?
I went to the University of New Haven in Connecticut, and they had a really cool old analog studio, but they had these rules where only upperclassmen were allowed to actually book session time. So I just became friends with as many upperclassmen as possible and just said, I will do anything. I'll just roll cables. I'll get you coffee, anything I could do just to be a studio rat. And I had so much fun and got to be part of a lot of really fun sessions. Came back to Maine, and all those dreams kind of got shelved for a long time.
Yeah, because you live in the woods.
I do.
Yeah.
I'm what we call the boonies. I'm out there. And but you know, God had planted a seed, and my early Vineyard days, I was out at Anaheim. I was 9 or 10 years old, and my parents were at a pastor's conference out there, and they had a bunch of prophetic people come out to where the kids program was. And I got prayed for by a group of intercessors, and they prayed this prayer over me. They said that they saw that, they said, we see worship on you, and we feel like that you're going to be a writer and a producer of songs that are going to go all around the world. 9 or 10, I cared about Ninja Turtles.
Yeah, and you have no context for that.
I didn't play music. I had no context for what a studio was, or producing music or writing music.
It's interesting that the word producer was used.
Yeah, and I wept. I'm a 10-year-old boy who had a great life. I had nothing to weep over, but it was a God thing that was in me that I didn't even know was there. It was pulled right out. And that literally stayed with me my whole life. And it was always in the back of my mind. And it was funny how like the way it intersected for me was through these bands I was in. Nobody
What
else
kind of bands?
I was like in some pretty terrible bands, but I thought it was cool in early 2000s. I was in this like a rapcore band actually.
Yeah, okay.
For a brief period of time. Yeah. Hey, Limp Bizkit was like a thing.
Yeah, that's right.
And then I was in some metal and hardcore bands for a while. And
what did you play?
Well, I played bass in a couple of these bands, and then I actually played synth and keys in another band. And yeah, I kind of like
it was the early 2000s. There's nothing to apologize for.
Yeah,
apologize for.
It was something, but it's funny how like God was using that as a way to, in a sense, like kind of reawaken that prophetic word that was spoken over me, because I'm in the studio and all of a sudden it was like, oh yeah, that happened. I kind of would remember. And so fast forward, I end up, I come home from college, get married and just doing a lot in my life as a young married man to try to just survive and figure it out and make ends meet, working like crazy. And I got a laptop, like a old Apple G4, G5 or something like that.
I remember those.
And I got Ableton like Live 3 or Live 4, something like that. And that was the first recording software I'd ever worked with, because everything I'd done up to that point was tape-based. And it was like magic to me that you could do all these things. And then borrowed an interface and borrowed Pro Tools from my brother. And it was just like fire. Like there was something happening. And my wife and I ended up building a house out in the woods. And I thought to myself, well, you know what? I'm going to start seeing if anybody wants to record with me. I'm starting to figure some of this out. And I started having people over my house and recording. And I got to the point where all of a sudden I was getting so busy having people wanting to record with me. I realized I need to do something about this. And I was making a,
getting by.
I was getting by with it, and I was working, doing other stuff, but it was kind of a side moonlighting thing. And I just went from there into, I went into like a partnership with some friends, and we started a company called Anchour.
Yeah.
And I brought the studio to that partnership. And Anchour was not just about music production. It was a creative agency, but there was a studio component. And that's really when the lid kind of got pulled off on this thing, and it really went into overdrive. And we started working with a lot of really great artists, like really soon, really fast. It was just like a favor. There was a blessing that was on it. And so that's the genesis of all this stuff. I know it was a little bit longer than we probably wanted, but it's crazy how I arrived at that destination, and there's no way I could have ever planned it.
I love about what you just said, or the story that you just told, is it was, or at least it feels like you were always like just following your muse, following the fun, you know, and it just kept bringing you to this sort of place that you have your own like legit studio now.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah,
It's crazy. I didn't strive for it.
yeah.
You know?
But I'm sure there were some difficult days as well.
Oh man.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's do this. Okay, before we go into the other stuff I want to talk about, tell us about maybe like one thing that was difficult. Because people sometimes think, oh, it's easy to do this kind of stuff. Rewarding, yes. Difficult is almost always in there, right?
Sure. There's a lot of things that are difficult.
Yeah.
I think for me, probably one of the more difficult things was learning to set boundaries.
What kind of boundaries?
And well, there's creative boundaries for sure. But before we talk about creative boundaries, I'd say personal boundaries. There's a mentality that I had for some reason. And I think there's this thought, and it's not necessarily untrue, but there's this persona with studio life that you just record until 3 a.m.
Oh yeah,
Inspiration hits,
yeah.
you know, and you have these amazing moments, and you do whatever it takes to get the right take, all this stuff.
Yeah, rock and roll is all night long, right?
All night long. And I know there is an element of that in certain circles, and I've been there. And I've done some pretty crazy long recording sessions out of necessity. But early on, I didn't know how to balance that with my family and my life. And it was kind of an excuse that I'd use. And every project was like, hey, this could be like the big project. Like, I got to do this. And that put my personal life into a lot of hurt pretty quick.
Yeah.
You know, and it was super straining on my family.
Yeah.
You know, to be honest with you, with starting a new company, you have to hustle. Is a startup. In a lot of companies, I haven't met a lot of great companies that are still around where there wasn't a big push and a hustle for the first few years. But it comes at a cost, and the cost is not just financial. The cost is not just your time. If you have family, it's everyone who's attached to you suffers as well. And so that was part of some of the pains in the beginning. I had a son who was born right around when this was happening. I have 5 kids, and this is my 4th child, and my son was born, and I missed a lot of his first 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And that's hard. It's still hard for me.
Yeah.
But there was necessity there, but there was not always necessity there.
Yeah, some of it was perceived necessity.
Perceived necessity. That's exactly it. And I think with studio life, there's a tipping point where you have the keys to the car, and you get to set the parameters for like when you're going to work.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to say like, no, I do 9 to 5.
Yeah.
If you want to work with me,
I do 9 to 5.
I do 9 to 5.
Yeah.
So you can take some time off. I'm going to honor the fact that you're taking time off, and it's going to be really great.
Yeah. I'm going to work hard.
But I'm not going to do a Saturday night until 3 a.m. Just not going to happen.
Yeah. That's great. I think every man has to learn that lesson, and you know, especially when he's like hustling for his family, you know,
Yeah.
it's a tough one.
It is a tough one.
Yeah. All right, Josh, this is actually what I wanted to get into.
Great.
Because, well, this is a podcast that's really geared to the worship community. And so a lot of people who are listening are songwriters, or maybe they want to be a songwriter, or maybe they have some songs already written and they want to record it, you know, and sort of like document what God has done in their community or in their church. And well, I wanted you to come on and talk a little bit about why does a songwriter or a church need to get a producer when they're thinking about documenting the songs that are sort of bubbling up in their church?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's a subject matter that I'm obviously pretty passionate about.
No, you're invested in it.
Yeah,
right?
I am. Well, there's a lot of different angles, and I think it starts with So there's a technical level. Like, I think it's important to define what's the difference between a producer and then an engineer.
Yeah.
It used to be in the old days that you would go to a studio and there'd be all these different people that had different roles and responsibilities in a studio. And the engineer and the producer were not necessarily the same person. In fact, often they were not. You know, you have the image of the guy with the mustache and the mullet sitting at the console, like pushing faders, turning buttons. That typically wasn't the producer. The producer was in charge of overseeing the music, overseeing the process, overseeing the artist, the talent, making sure that they're giving and delivering what's needed for the song and the moments, the budget, right?
Yeah.
Like, and that still exists, in especially with record labels. That's still a big thing, actually. But these days, you kind of have to wear all the different hats, and most modern studios, most newer studios that are doing well and thriving, are centered around a producer or producers that typically know how to track really well. They know how to mix really well. They are typically songwriters. They typically play a ton of different instruments. You know, they have a tool belt and there's a lot of tools in it. And so when you start working with a producer in 2018, 2019, I think what you're getting someone who wears a lot of different hats, and they're bringing a lot of different experience to the table. But beyond that, I think a producer, one of the best things about a producer is that you are getting somebody who's outside of your process. They're outside of your community, most likely. And so they're coming into the songs with like no nostalgia.
I think this is the money. This is it right here, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So they're coming in, there's like no attachment.
Fresh ears.
Right. Fresh ears. There's no attachment to, like, I don't know what that lyric means for you. I don't know.
Or even your ego.
Right. Right. Exactly. Like your ego, I don't know that you're like a hot shot worship leader, like at your church or whatever. Like, there's like, I'm just looking at the song and I'm just trying to figure out what the song is trying to say. Like, what does it want to say, sonically, musically, and are the pieces that are there giving me the feels, giving me what I feel like the song really is calling for. And if it's not, I have no problem calling out the problem areas that are kind of maybe rubbing me a little like wrong, or like there's maybe there's just some opportunity that I see, like, oh, this is a moment in the song. How do we capitalize this the best? Here's some ideas. Now, and I think this becomes increasingly important depending on what some of your objectives are with a record or a song or a recording. Sometimes we don't realize that we do the same things over and over and over when we're playing and we're writing, and especially when you're working with the same group of people. And our approaches to a song might not really be serving the song the best. Yeah, we're so used to doing it a certain way.
I know it just even as a guitar player, that it's really easy for me to get into the like the little habits of my own playing.
Right.
The chords that I normally play.
Right.
Just the chord progressions that I normally play. Like these are, that's the standard thing.
Right.
And then we do the same thing with a band, and we do the same thing with a worship culture at our church or whatever, don't we?
Right. Exactly. So I think in the context of worship and working with a producer, one of the objectives and the goals is also to, it's not to throw away all those things, but it is to kind of like strip it all back and look at it as almost like a blank slate at first. A lot of times, like Carl, who's my business partner over at Anchour, brilliant. The guy's a beast, okay? Mega talent. And our process kind of changes a little bit, but a lot of times what we'll do if we start working on a new song, we will pull all the music away and just listen to just the vocal and just the melody and kind of almost ignore like what's been already written for some of the chords sometimes. And just kind of just start just playing. Like, so Carl will sit down at the piano, I'll grab my guitar, and we just spend time just with the vocal and just finding some opportunities for movement and shift. And I find like that's again, outside process. It's really hard to do that when you are so close to the material.
Yeah, and especially if you've written the song, like you spend so much time with it. It's almost as though you have muscle memory now.
Oh yeah, we call it like demoitis. You know, it's like a sickness. Like you get to a point where you can't actually hear anything different.
Yeah, even if the recorded version is better, there's something in you that's really stuck to the demo.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Been there, done that.
We've done a handful of live records too, not just like studio records. And that's super fun because then you're working directly with the bands in their environment. But it's funny where the personalities and the egos kind of come out when you start asking people to do different things. And you realize also that not everybody that's in your crew might really care about serving the song. They care about their part.
Yeah.
More than that.
My sweet licks, baby.
Like I'm a bass player, but I'm also a guitar player, so I'm playing bass chords, and it's like, hey, we're gonna just
can we not do that?
Can we just do like eighth notes?
Yeah.
Like on the root?
Yeah.
That root note's great.
Yeah, it's really it's working for me right now. Yeah.
Something feels so settled when you just play the root.
Yeah. It's awesome. Yeah. I've noticed that when I've had good experiences with producers, that it feels like I had a band member added to the band. It's like, I think a great producer is like the fifth member of the band.
Totally. Yep, totally. That's the language and part of that is because, when Carl and I are working with other people, we're not what I would call strong-handed. I've been around strong-handed producers. I've worked with strong-handed producers. But we look at it more as it's a trust. It's a relationship. And we're not offended in the least bit with throwing out ideas and then getting pushback saying, no, I hate that. That's great. That's fine. Totally cool.
Let's go another place.
Let's go someplace else. Let's try something different. We're not coming into it like it's our way or the highway. Like, we really know what we're doing. Like we shoot from the hip. We're just coming into it excited.
But you are bringing your experience.
We're bringing our experience. We're bringing our own sensibilities. And that's kind of what I think a lot of people are hiring us for is sensibility, an approach to certain things. And that's what I think anyone should hire a producer for is you trust their sensibilities. You like what they are currently doing.
Okay, so a couple weeks ago, my son River and we were listening to some music, and we listened to Emmylou Harris's record "Wrecking Ball."
Oh yeah,
which Daniel Lanois produced that record.
Yeah,
first track on that record. One, it has this amazing guitar sound, and I went and looked at the liner notes and realized that Daniel Lanois played the guitar on that. And then when you hear that, you realize, oh, this is where U2, like U2 sound is Daniel Lanois.
Absolutely.
I mean, yes, it's the Edge and yes, it's Bono, but it's that he discovered it by becoming a member of the band.
Right. And that's phenomenal, right? That when you have a producer or a production, in hip hop, there's a lot of production teams, and there's like these crews of people or individuals that they've kind of found their sound, and it's pretty cool. Like my favorite producer, or one of my favorite producers, is this guy named Jonathan Vanderslice from California.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that I love about Jonathan Vanderslice, like he has his niche, it's definitely like indie, but he has this term that he's coined where he calls it sloppy hi-fi. And when you listen to it and you go, oh, that is sloppy hi-fi. There's something that feels so future about it, but at the same time, it's so earthbound and organic. And every artist that he works with, you can tell there's somehow this sounds like Vanderslice. You know, and maybe it's because he played some of the parts, but sometimes it's just his sonic print.
Yeah. His
That is-
room.
his gear, the way he's using it, his approach to like song structure, how he approaches like getting out of a chorus back into a verse, turnarounds, things like that. You know, producers, they bring those sensibilities. So, you know, again, back to this earlier point of why should you? It's because the producer is awesome, or they should be.
Yeah, of course.
You know, hire an awesome producer who's gonna that you like their sound, you like what they do, and be willing to be molded or explore, or like you said, bring them into your band. Build some trust.
That's what I want to do. Like when I'm in that space, I want the producer to be heavy-handed. Maybe wouldn't be the right word, but strong.
Problem solver is kind of one way I look at it too.
Yeah, problem solver is definitely. But I want there to feel like, oh, we just got like an ace player added to our band.
Yeah.
You know, now let's all reconsider what we used to do based upon that we got an ace, you know?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's great.
Okay, Josh, let's talk a little further. What should a person just sort of like expect from a good studio experience? Maybe they've never like been in a studio. Maybe they've never had a producer and it's all new and they've got a song. Like what's like on the artist side, you know, as someone who's going to be hiring a studio or an engineer and a producer, what should they expect when they show up if it's a good place?
Well, if it's a good place, I can't speak too much towards how other studios operate currently. But I'll tell you what I care about is I care about anyone who comes into my studio having a really great time and having a really great experience. And I really care about giving everything that I have to their music and their time and their sessions. And it's hard because sometimes you get into situations where you have to dig deep to find like, okay, where can I find some passion to get into some of this music? Because sometimes, I mean, let's just be honest, some of the things that are being created are not always inspiring.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to fight to find the inspiration, find the gold, and to capitalize on it. But I never, ever, ever, ever try to make an artist or a band that comes in feel belittled ever. And we work super hard to try to make them own the moment. Like we don't like to retract people's stuff. You know, we don't mind playing on people's stuff, and we get permission and we talk about that. But we've worked with, for instance, drummers that have never played to a click, and they come in and we're like, we really need to do this to a click, especially for the goals that you're setting. Yeah. And their drum parts will probably not always be as strong as they could be. So if you got a drummer who's rough, right, you don't want them to feel bad. Like I know studios that will literally say, like, get on like the talkback mic and say, yeah, you just can't do this. We're going to hire, we should just hire a drummer to come in. I know plenty of studios that do that. Yeah. It's faster and cheaper, but we will not do that. And what we'll do instead is we'll say, okay, hey, let's just play through the song real quick. We let them play through the song, play it the way that they normally do. Then all of a sudden we'll say, that was okay, great. It feels like you're getting warmed up. Let's just do one more take, and get them a little more warmed up, a little more comfortable with the environment. Yeah. Then we'll immediately say, okay, that's great. Hey, you know what I want to do? Like, I want to pick up at the chorus. Yeah. Let's just start at the chorus. Let's just get that feeling really good. That's a big moment in the song. Yeah. Well, they're not used to starting the song from the chorus. And some drummers, and that maybe aren't super solid, they're going to be in a position where all of a sudden they're like kind of thinking, well, I actually don't really remember. What do I do on the chorus again or whatever? And you hit it, and then you start throwing out a couple ideas. Oh, that's really cool what you did right there. That little fill thing was awesome. Yeah. Yeah, let's just try to hit that like section again. Okay, hey, you know what? That feeling good. Let's jump over it. Like, can we hit the bridge real quick? I feel like the bridge is another moment. Then go back to the chorus maybe. And then all of a sudden you say, okay, cool. Hey, once you come back in, before we do the verses, I want you just to listen to this real quick. We make sure that we have our drum sounds and our drum tones like dialed in. So when they come back from the drum room, back into the control room, and they listen to what they just played on the chorus, their mind is blown.
Yeah, they're excited.
They're excited. Their drums are like thumping super hard, hitting their chest, and maybe the part is really like dialed in. So then all of a sudden they're going, yeah, I did that.
Yeah,
I did that.
Yeah, it's just building them as a player.
And so now you're building them as a player. They trust you, and guess what? Now you can get them to pretty much do anything for the rest of the record or the rest of the song.
You're just investing in their own musicianship a little bit.
And so you start to kind of do that a little bit, like with the whole process and all the different players, and you find the good parts and really capitalize on them. And what ends up happening is the artist or the band starts to get so excited because it's sounding so good. That is intentional design. We intentionally want you to work your butt off. If you're not exhausted by the time that you're leaving, and you've worked with us, and you are fried by the end.
No, I'm toast.
It's because, and like you wouldn't even call yourself a drummer, but you've played drums on a ton of the stuff that we've done together.
We have, and what's funny is that at least my experience with you guys in the studio is that Carl kept making me play instruments that I don't normally play.
Right.
And it's two things. It's so fun.
Yeah.
It's so fun to do things you don't normally do. And then it's stretching.
Yeah.
But there's something about the stretching that you sometimes you find things you wouldn't have found.
Absolutely.
Because you took some sort of a new risk.
Right.
Yeah.
And part of it for us, the reason why we do that too, is it's really fun to put people that don't play certain instruments into situations to play those things, because they will probably goof up and do things that people that do play those instruments would not do.
Yeah.
And sometimes those goof ups are super cool.
Yeah.
And you go, that's great.
Let's do more of that.
Let's do more of that, you know? So, you know, to kind of like get back to, you know, what should people expect? I don't know about other studios, but if you were to come into our studio, what it is that you could expect that that we're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to work our butts off.
Yeah.
You're going to own it.
Yeah.
This is not going to be like, you're not just going to come and do your vocals and then like as a demo and then come back and the whole song's done and then come back and do your final vocal. Like that's not really our gig.
Yeah.
Like, you know, you're going to get your hands dirty and you're going to be so proud of what you did. And you'll be able to hold your head up high when you go and you show people and say, hey, check out my song. Guess what? It really is your song.
Yeah. That's the most fun part.
You know?
Right along these lines, we made a record one time and Bobby Hartree helped us make it.
I love Bobby. His work is amazing.
Yeah, it is.
He's one of my favorites.
Oh, man. Of course, right? But Bobby came in and he got the crew together and he said, my job this week with you guys is to take away all the fear.
That's great.
Right? And what's funny is he said that, and he's not a demonstrative person, but when he said that, you could literally feel the anxiety leave the room.
Yeah.
And it was almost like all this permission came into the room and everyone did so much better.
Right.
You know? Yeah.
Right. And this is something that I've heard. There's a producer in Nashville called named Seth Mosley. And he has this thing in his studio that says, dare to suck. You know? And
same idea.
It's the same idea, right? And Carl and I, we definitely adhere to that same thing where it's like, and so comfortability is huge. Like we want people to feel freedom to just be super vulnerable, you know, and that takes a lot of like trust and relationship and courage. And so, you know, I think wherever you decide to work, it's about relationship too. You know, do you like the people that are at that studio? Like, do you feel like they're for you and for this thing, or do they just want your money?
That's a huge thing.
Yeah. Because there's a lot, you know, like, hey, listen, almost everybody will take your money.
Yeah. And I've noticed that in music, but in everything in life, like all the good stuff that I've ever been a part of, the actual good stuff was built on a foundation of like friendship.
Absolutely.
And enjoying the people you're working with.
Absolutely.
Oh man, that's good.
And anytime I've worked with a client that I felt like the relationship's been bad, the process has been bad.
Isn't
You
that
know?
interesting?
It hasn't been life-giving at all. And I tell you what, and some of it's been like bigger budget things too, where you feel like you need to do it as a business. And you know, back to some of the stuff we talked about earlier, where boundaries.
Yeah.
Like I'm at the point where I'm most of the time only working with people that I feel like I want to work with them. It's like the relationship's good.
That's a great moment in your life to be, to have gotten to a spot now where you can pretty much say,
Sort of do that most of the time.
Sort of most of the time say,
Yeah.
you know, I'm going to work with people that I have some sort of connection to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amen.
Yeah.
Love it.
It's good.
All right, Josh. Hey, this has been helpful. This is going to help people begin to get their brains around, you know, making music and stuff. But I want to take a hard left turn here for
Great.
the last question
Let's
of
do
the
it.
podcast. This is a little something I've been asking everybody who's on the podcast.
Okay.
When was the time you experienced like overwhelming joy?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of moments. The ones that stand out to me that I carry with me constantly is the birth of all my children. I'm sure you've got that answer. a
Oh,
lot.
it's so consistent,
Yeah.
but it doesn't diminish the truth or the reality of it.
Yeah. You know, I've heard people say, oh, you know, there's no such thing as love at first sight, and they limit it just down to, you know, attraction,
Yeah, romantic love.
romantic love.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of like always am so confused by that perspective, because I think to myself, with each of my kids, there's this like thing that happens where if you haven't had a child, you know, someday if you have a child, this is what you'll experience. When that child is born and you see him or her for the first time, you fall in love in a way that will rock your world.
It's true.
You realize in a moment, all of who I am, all of who my wife is, exists for this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This is like the ultimate physical expression of our love for each other, is this child.
Mm-hmm. It's amazing.
And it doesn't just stop right now. It begins in a way right
Mm-hmm.
now.
I wonder why that touches us so deeply.
Well, I might be getting into theological trouble with some of this, but part of this is that we have God who is a creator, and he calls us to bring life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we get to be partakers in this amazing miracle of human life. Like, that is insane. That is insane. That like
it's amazing.
that
it
like
works.
humanity isn't just people like bubbling up from the dirt. We are partakers in something that God started. Like it's just, he puts this thing into motion and then invites us to be co-creators with him.
Yeah.
Like, that's unreal to me.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely unreal. And the multiplying factor, the more children you end up having, it's like the love just multiplies. It
doesn't diminish.
It doesn't diminish. It doesn't get divided. It gets multiplied. So those are definitely like the super high moments for me.
Yeah.
I don't know as though there's anything.
Yeah.
I don't know as though there's anything that really is higher than those moments for
Doesn't
me.
have to be. That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
All right, dude. Hey, thanks for being on the podcast.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom. I think this is going to be really helpful to a lot of people.
Cool.
All right. Peace, bro.
Hey, everybody, this is Casey Corum, the producer of the Ferment Podcast. Thanks for listening. If you've been enjoying the podcast, I've got a couple ways you could really help us. First of all, review the podcast on iTunes or the podcast platform of your choice. This helps more people find us. Also, connect with us on social media, on Instagram at the Ferment Podcast and on Twitter at FermentCast. All right, people, see you next time.